The balconies of Rome breathed heat and dust. The cobblestones remembered the footsteps of soldiers, merchants, and passers-by, heard the whispers of laws renewed and the clatter of wagon wheels, which seemed. I walk along the narrow streets of Myra, where the air smells of axle grease and citrus juice, where in the shops grain is sold at prices that in former days one could only dream of. But today it is time to tell not about kings, not about generals, not about grand ceremonies, but about the lives of people who lived on the border between two worlds, the old and the new, where the empire seemed to depend on the figure of the emperor, buffeted by the winds of a barbarian. Scene 1. Provisions at the market and in the heart in Forum Square. Right in the fishmonger's shop, the old merchant Publius tells his son how the days have changed. "Look, son," he says, "before we counted coins and the measures of prosperity by grain and wine. Now grain has become scarce, and wine a luxury. Prices for bread are rising. You won't know whom to ask, and people begin to count every coin as truth. Inflation is not a rumor. It is the city's pulse, beating quickly. We live by the creed of the future, which no one can name." Publion, his son, gazes into the crowd. Rome is gradually turning into a place where not only Latin is spoken, but the tongues of strangers as well. Trade wanes, then flares anew with new demands, and like a fire in a cellar, returns. The market becomes a battleground for survival. One offers grain at a price that seems insane. Another pushes the price below any justification, and both head to the till, as if pulling at threads of an invisible network woven from compromises and acts of survival. Through this market we move with Gaea, a young woman whose hands smell of coffee and laundry soap. Gaea is not the goddess of fate. She does not wear a laurel wreath on her head. She simply knows how to survive these days. She sews clothes, cuts patterns from leather, sells clay pots that keep warmth in the homes of Tivoli's residents in the nearby Tivoli district, where artisans and fishermen lived. Her home is a small workshop with a tiny courtyard, and in that courtyard, between the shop and the oven, a story is born that will become the connecting link between the ages. But let us not forget that the heartbeat of Rome beneath our steps is not only the market and the workshops. It is also the voice of the street, whispering that the empire, admired by our ancestors, begins to wear thin from within. The underground corridors where we stock provisions fill with secrets and rumors. Rumors that a new army might prove more idle than its predecessor, that the emperor may be far beyond the palace walls. And deep within this, there are forces, shadows of various peoples, who, like a river with different tributaries, weave themselves into the current of history. Scene 2. Diocletian, a man who was accustomed to discipline and to order, reigning even where it was not needed, came not into a peaceful realm, but into a world of harsh reality. A surge of new laws is not so much a miracle as a necessary means to keep the... He divided the governed territory into provinces and placed at the head of each province two co-leaders, as if two wings of a gigantic eagle, so that the wind would not blow them away. And beside him Constantine, a man who sought to unite what was breaking apart, but gave the world a new view of power, a view in which the city could live not only within palace walls, but as part of something larger, a united empire, but with a new... Here we meet Lucius, a farmer from a province where the fields are half empty and the water in the wells is dull. Lucius is not a politician. He is an ordinary man who has to feel the disintegration on his own skin. He sees in his village old roads appearing, roads that do not hold their bridges for long, and trading caravans disappear for a week and return without grain. Lucius understands, if he does not learn to live with the changes, his farm will become an empty field. And he learns. He sells oil and wax. He learns to calculate risk and believes that tomorrow there will be sun and that sun can bring new life. Diocletian and Constantine work to keep power in the hands of a single state, and this is impossible without strict discipline and new ideas. They raise taxes, but they also raised. At this time, on the western edge of the empire, in Gaul and Italy, voices begin to rise that say the empire must be narrowed to a specific territory in order to survive. This splits even more into two parts. Here people begin to say that the future lies not in Rome but in the east, where the city can be a fortress against the wind of time. But on the west, there are still people who try to cling to the remnants of the old order, to Rome as a symbol, to the right to rule. These people, from different corners of the empire, craftsmen, soldiers, merchants, and common folk, are united by debts and hopes that keep them together, as one by one cities surrender or take new positions. Scene 3. The Barbarians' Gates. Goths, Franks, Vandals. Soon new figures appear on the horizon. The Goths are people burdened by debts and fears, weighed down by the Roman tax system and harsh rules. The leaders are not heroes from legends, but people who gain their strength through experience and survival. They learn to live on the empire's fringes, in places where roads wind across rugged hills and where rivers lie dry, for rivers do not hold water when they pass through capitals. The Goths become not only our enemies, they become teachers of how to turn defeat into new power, how to gain freedom from chains. We listen to conversations about the burial of the past, an old Roman scribe who tells his daughter that the Romans thought they were invincible, and that it was their pride that became their blindness. He tells her, "Let your world be wider than mine. Let you see not only the walls of the city, but the roads that lead beyond the walls. Wisdom lies in foresight, not in strong walls." Emerging barbarian movements are not only a military threat, they are a psychological blow to all layers of society. People who once believed in order begin to doubt. If the empire ceases to exist as a single entity, what will remain? What will happen to their homes? What will happen to their work and their gods? With this comes a new consciousness. People begin to seek new ways to live and work. They rebuild agriculture, adopt crafts and knowledge that bring. Armies become not so much arenas of victory as fields of decisions. Who will remain in service and whether he will be loyal to the emperor, who now hardly governs those lands. People who once felled trees to build new towers are now forced to learn to use bows and spears to defend their homes and their families. We recall voices that said, "The empire will pass into the past, but will not disappear completely." We see scenes from camps. Legionaries who were once trained to wield weapons and maintain discipline are now forced to do what used to be called transitional work, carrying goods, repairing roads, building bridges where possible. And here too are scenes of changing times, where old documents no longer hold their power, but the human community seeks new ways to keep the shared rhythm of life. Trade with new peoples who live beyond the borders, yet need the goods they can offer. How many times do we see on screen scenes in which people lament instability, and yet in their eyes gleam astonishment and hope? Here they are, the survivors who know how to detach from pain and move forward. This is not love for the empire in its former great glory, but love for life that continues, even if the names of cities change, even if borders are redrawn. Scene 5. Conclusion and lessons. It is precisely the fall, not the end of the era, but a transformation. Not the end of history, but the beginning of a new page. Through the gaze of an old scribe, we see that the ancient orders, which seemed continuous and unbending, pass into new forms of existence. The shells of the empire fade away, but the spirit of the single community that once held people together continues to live. In churches, a new reality emerges, the East, where the capital and other cities exist, where language and traditions give birth to a new syncretism. And the West, which did not disappear, but transformed into what would later be called the Middle Ages. We see how people become not Romans in the strict sense, but indulge themselves with new identities: Gauls, Spaniards, Galatians, Italians, and many other peoples who unite under new rules, not by the old empire, but by... And in this finale, there are lessons. What can we take for ourselves? That a powerful idea does not always hold monolithically. Sometimes it breaks apart in order to reassemble in another form. That power, like the market, survives when people know how to adapt to change, when they learn to live under conditions of uncertainty, and when they do not forget to value loved ones and new opportunities, even in destruction. And most importantly, that the hero is not necessarily the one who wields a sword, but the one who holds on to hope and believes that tomorrow is possible if today we take a prudent step forward. Scene 6. The threads of the past and the voices of the future. We walk along Ravenna's embankment, a city where Eastern and Western cultures meet, where the air smells of sea salt and of dark breads made from flour baked in ovens. Here people learn to live between worlds, where there was once one port, then two ports, and the third may yet appear. We hear the conversations of young people who dream that their children can freely move between cities and the country, to wear clothes from different corners of the empire, and to speak in different languages, without forgetting their roots and the memory of their ancestors. And now we have reached the end of our journey, which does not end at the edge of the map, but moves into a new horizon, the horizon of change, which does not erase history, but continues its thread. The fall of Rome is not merely an event on the map of time. It is a story about people who lived through an era of great change and found within it the strength that helped them not only to survive, but to create new foundations for the future. Epilogue. What remains in memory? It would seem that the age of decline and the disintegration of the empire should have left the world in chaos. But from this chaos arises not emptiness, but new energy. Cities become stronger in their ability to embrace change. Artisans adopt new techniques. Trade goes beyond previous borders and connects peoples on invisible roads. In the temples, a different voice sounds, asserting that faith can unite and divide, but never disappear entirely. In schools, old textbooks disappear, and if you ask me what exactly in this story can be called truth, the answer is simple. Truth does not have to sound like a loud name on the palace wall. Truth is a human sense of service and survival that leads people through crises. Truth is the ability to learn from mistakes and move forward. Truth is the understanding that a fall does not mean disappearance, but the opening of a new road. Thus begins a new road in history, a road on which people who lived in the era of great change show us how to build a world again and again that seems impossible, but becomes possible if we keep faith in tomorrow. In this tale, which began in the market, where Publius spoke of rising prices and the amount of grain, ends with a memory of the people who lived between two eras, and their story lives on in us. Because the fall of Rome is not the end, but the continuation of history under new names, on new roads, and under different stars.